When I sat down with Michael Jackson's former assistant, I expected the usual choreography of guarded answers and carefully placed silences. Instead, the conversation kept circling back to one question that has followed the Jackson family for decades. And, as the assistant put it was the one thing the public could never stop chasing. Blanket Jackson, Michael Jackson's youngest child, was born into a dazzling spotlight, yet he carried one of the darkest mysteries. Who was his birth mother? The assistant confirmed what has long fueled the whispers. The birth certificate was effectively a void, the mother's name absent, blank, erased, leaving only the imprint of a single father in the public record. And that vacuum did what it always does in celebrity history. It invited the world to fill it. Names became narratives. Pia Bhatti, who once lived in the Jackson home, a Mexican-American nurse named Helena. But the assistant was blunt about what those theories really were. Rumors dressed up as certainty. Then came the pivot, the detail that made the room feel smaller. Michael's lost diaries suddenly appeared, and in them, the assistant described trembling words, the kind that read as if he were whispering from the past, hinting at an untold truth, a truth he had tried so hard to bury. From a journalist's standpoint, this is where a pop myth becomes something colder and more consequential. Because this is no longer just a story about a pop star. It is, as the assistant framed it, a tear in the fabric of fate, where love, secrets, and darkness intertwine, devouring a child's innocence. Blanket, now known as Biggie, grew up with his father's magnificent legacy, but alongside it sat a wound that never healed, an unanswered ache shaped into one relentless sentence. Who was truly behind his birth? The assistant didn't sensationalize that pain. They dissected it, how the absence of a name can become a presence of its own, how silence in a famous family doesn't fade, it echoes. Before we dive into the main content and uncover this shocking secret, some secrets don't lie in what's told, but in the blanks left behind. And that was exactly how Michael Jackson's former assistant began when I asked the question everyone has asked for years. For Blanket, later known as Bigi Jackson, that blank space appeared from the very first moment he opened his eyes. On February 21st, 2002, at Sharp Grossmont Hospital in La Mesa, California, a baby boy took his first cry, bearing the last name of the most famous man on the planet. But when the birth certificate was filled out, there was only one name, Michael Jackson. The rest, mother, was left empty. The assistant told me it wasn't just empty, it was chilling, as if there had never been a woman behind the birth, enduring pain and giving life to the boy. Michael's choice left the world stunned, and as the assistant described it, no one but Michael truly knew why he decided to conceal the mother's name. Michael once shared in a few interviews that Blanket was born via artificial insemination and a surrogate. It was a brief, almost cold answer, something the assistant said always felt like a deliberate wall, especially because it clashed with the tenderness Michael showed the boy in every gesture. But to the public, that answer only sparked more suspicion. In a family already so accustomed to the limelight and sensational stories, the decision to erase the mother's name from the birth certificate became fuel for thousands of articles and millions of conversations. And the assistant noted how quickly the world turned a missing line into a never-ending storyline. The contradiction became even more apparent, and the assistant didn't hesitate to name it. On one side was the image of Blanket, the youngest child, often nestled in Michael's arms, with an innocent face and wide, bright, bewildered eyes. On the other side was the birth certificate, like a shattered mirror, reflecting a chilling, unfillable void. Michael, the famous father, chose to expose himself and his artistic secrets, but hid the very origin of his own child. That contrast, the assistant said, was the precise reason the world branded Blanket as the mystery child, the most enigmatic child of the Jackson family, because ambiguity is where celebrity culture feeds best. It's been said that when he was young, Blanket rarely smiled for the cameras. He was shielded with blankets in Michael's arms, as if Michael didn't want anyone to see his son's full face. When I brought this up, the assistant leaned into the uncomfortable part. The public, already so used to scrutinizing every detail of the Jackson family's life, began to question. Was the shielding not just for privacy, but also to hide a certain truth? A child with no mother's name on his documents, with no clear public image. It was as if Blanket wasn't allowed to belong to the outside world. And in my experience, when a public figure tries to control the frame, the audience immediately assumes there's something inside the frame they're not permitted to see. What made everything more tense was the context of Michael Jackson himself. He was a black artist who had been subjected to harsh judgments from society about his appearance, skin color, and personal choices. Something the assistant said shaped nearly every decision Michael made about exposure. He understood how cruel the public's gaze could be. It was rumored that when he looked for a surrogate, Michael had very specific standards. Appearance, health, and even skin tone had to be harmonious. The assistant stressed the nuance here. To many, it was a controlling decision, but for Michael, it might have been his way of protecting his child from the very prejudices that had caused him such pain. This was the tragic contradiction. He wanted his son to be safe, but to do so, he chose to erase half of his son's identity. The media didn't miss the opportunity. Articles surged, creating a multitude of theories. Some were convinced that Blanket was the result of a secret relationship and that Michael deliberately hid it to maintain a clean image. Others asserted that the boy's mother was a Latin American nurse, an ordinary person whose life was changed by the decision to be a surrogate for the king of pop. Some rumors went even further, dragging women who had been connected to the Jackson family into the story. But the assistant was firm. It all remained just rumor, no concrete evidence, no official confirmation, only the familiar machine of fame, turning absence into allegation. And at the center of all the speculation was a boy who never got to choose. Blanket grew up with that secret, while the public continued to seek answers. People looked at him and saw Michael's gentle demeanor, a somewhat sad gaze, and more than once compared him to various women. But the truth slipped away from every theory, as Michael never publicly spoke about it again. He only said, "I love my children with all my heart. He is my gift." The assistant told me those words weren't a deflection. They were a boundary, the kind celebrities draw when the cost of explaining feels greater than the cost of silence. Michael's love for Blanket was undeniable. He held him, led him by the hand, and protected him from the most critical eyes. But that love came with a secret that was never spoken. The blank space on the birth certificate was not just a legal detail, it was a symbol of silence. It was the silence of a father who chose to keep the truth hidden in exchange for a safe haven for his child. But it was also a silence that made the world relentlessly curious, constantly digging into that void. Because in celebrity journalism, the emptiest space is often the loudest headline. Blanket, or Biggie, was never an ordinary child. He was born into the dazzling light of the stage that Michael left behind. But he also grew up in the shadow of a secret that was never named. And from that very first day, his life has been tied to two words: the mystery. If the previous chapter's blank space on Blanket's birth certificate opened a mystery that shocked the world, the assistant told me this chapter turns darker with the arrival of another shadow, one that didn't belong to the Jackson family by name, yet seemed tied to them by proximity: Omar Bhatti. In the assistant's words, Omar was both familiar and strange, carrying the ease of a close friend, while inviting the kind of speculation celebrities spend their lives trying to outrun. And it was from that shadow, the assistant said, that the real drama began to unfold. Not because of what was proven, but because of what the public insisted on imagining. Omar Bhatti, the Norwegian man born in 1984, entered Michael Jackson's life by chance, but quickly became part of the household orbit. The assistant described the story that has been repeated for years. In 1996, at just 12 years old, Omar met Michael during a tour. The boy's passion for dancing caught Michael's attention, and from that moment, Omar's life shifted. Soon after, he appeared by Michael's side everywhere: trips, vacations, and family gatherings. Michael, the assistant emphasized, referred to Omar as a spiritual son, and that single phrase became an accelerant for suspicion later on, because celebrity culture treats emotional language like legal testimony. To the public, this closeness was unusual. Michael was famously private, rarely letting outsiders into his inner circle. Yet Omar not only entered it, he stayed. visible, woven into everyday moments. He sat with Michael's children on trips, laughed with them, trained with them. In some images, Omer appeared more often alongside Michael than certain blood relatives. The assistant said that visibility was the key. Once the public sees someone consistently near a global icon, they stop asking, "Who is he?" and begin asking, "What is he hiding?" Why did a stranger have this privilege? That perceived favoritism, the assistant noted, was enough to ignite the question people couldn't resist. Could Omer be related to Michael by blood? Then the rumor fire was lit by a statement that, the assistant told me, changed the temperature overnight. A comment attributed to Joe Jackson, Michael's father, in an ABC News conversation. Omer could be Michael's son. He based it on appearance and talent. The assistant described what followed with the weary precision of someone who has watched the media machine up close. A short statement detonated like a bomb, and within hours, international headlines were hunting for proof in photographs. The public began to scrutinize everything. Omer's eyes, his dance style, his smile, searching for the Jackson family imprint the way conspiracy forums search for patterns in noise. And so the drama erupted. People put Omer next to Michael, then put Omer next to Blanket. They edited photos, zoomed in, compared every single feature, eyes, nose, even hairstyle. Many insisted the resemblance was undeniable, not only in facial expressions, but in performance mannerisms, because fans often confuse influence with inheritance. The assistant pointed out the psychological trap. Once an audience wants a storyline, every coincidence becomes evidence. The theories multiplied. Was Omer Michael's secret son and Blanket his half-brother? Was everything Michael tried to hide somehow contained in the strange presence of this Norwegian figure? But the story didn't stop there. The assistant said the pressure peaked when the name of Omer's mother, Pia Bhatti, was pulled into the narrative. Pia had been rarely mentioned publicly, yet suddenly became a focal point when it was discovered she had worked as a nanny for Prince Jackson shortly after he was born. Her repeated presence in the Jackson home made the press latch on. In 2009, the Hollywood gossip floated a provocative theory. Pia could be Blanket's birth mother. The assistant didn't endorse it. They analyzed why it spread, because it neatly tied disparate threads into one sensational bow. A spiritual son, a nanny, a blank birth certificate, and an audience primed to believe the most dramatic version. Immediately, the public was shaken. If it were true, it would mean Michael didn't just view Omer as a spiritual son, but that something deeper, biological, linked the circle together. Pia, a woman who had once been close to the family, was placed under a harsh spotlight she never publicly sought. A nanny turned secret mother. The assistant said that framing alone guaranteed global pickup because it transforms a private worker into a headline character overnight. What made the rumors even more combustible was the Jackson family's silence. No denial, no confirmation. The assistant described that silence as oxygen, because in celebrity narratives, the absence of a statement is often treated as a statement. The public, already trained to pry into the Jackson family, began to read the quiet as tacit admission. Old photos were resurfaced. Comparisons multiplied. Young Blanket versus childhood Omer versus Pia. Each image became a puzzle piece people forced into place, as if bloodlines can be confirmed by a glance and a caption. Some articles pushed further, implying Pia wasn't just a nanny, but had a special, intimate relationship with Michael. Every interaction was reinterpreted as coded meaning. Even Pia's long connection to the family became evidence, as if staying close automatically meant hiding a secret. The assistant was clear. These theories lacked concrete proof, yet traveled fast because they were dramatic, emotionally satisfying, and easy to retell. Three qualities that make rumors resilient. The scariest part, the assistant told me, wasn't the truth itself. It was how easily people believed the rumor. The public began to insist Blanket and Omer shared a special connection. Some claimed they could see resemblance in their eyes, their smiles, every small gesture. Fans repeated lines like, "You can't look at Omer and Blanket and not think family." And repetition did what it always does. It made the names Omer and Blanket feel permanently linked in conversation, regardless of evidence. But what was the truth? To this day, the assistant emphasized, there is no concrete evidence that Pia is Blanket's mother, nor has the Jackson family publicly confirmed it. Omer himself has repeatedly said he saw Michael as a spiritual father, not a biological one. Yet for the public, that affirmation has never been enough. People believe what they want to believe, and in this case, they wanted a story more complex than the one they were given. So the shadow named Omer Bhatti grew heavier. Omer wasn't just a rapper, a dancer, or a close friend of Michael's. He became a living witness inside a theory, a central figure in a story he may never have asked to carry. And Blanket, the boy who simply needed a peaceful childhood, was swept into a vortex of rumors that had nothing to do with his choices. Omer Bhatti, from a Norwegian boy who loved to dance, became labeled as Michael's secret son, and then transformed into Blanket's suspicious brother. All because of silence, all because of a blank space on a birth certificate. And Blanket, whether he wanted to or not, couldn't escape that shadow. Too big, too complex, and too dramatic to break free from. If the story of Pia Bhatti had once stirred up a media storm, Michael Jackson's former assistant told me that just as the noise began to fade, the press needed a new match to strike. And that match came in a single name, Helena. This time, it wasn't framed as vague whispers or photo-by-photo guesswork. The assistant recalled how outlets presented it with clear details, verified witnesses, and neat numbers, clarity that made the public shiver, because it sounded too plausible to dismiss and too risky to accept without proof. According to reporting attributed to the Daily Mirror, Helena, a Mexican-American nurse, was alleged to have been Blanket's surrogate. An unfamiliar name, a woman no one could easily place, suddenly became the supposed key to Michael Jackson's greatest secret. The assistant stressed what made the claim combustible. There were no widely available pictures, no clean public trail, just a short, clinical description that circulated like a dossier. Light skin, good looks, healthy, intelligent, and, most importantly, a nurse. In Michael's world, the assistant suggested, that checklist is exactly what people wanted to believe he would choose, because it fits the myth of a perfectionist who engineered everything. A close friend was quoted in the coverage saying, Michael Jackson chose Helena because she was of Latin descent, but had American citizenship. Helena was also a nurse, which made Michael feel very secure. When I asked the assistant why that line mattered, they didn't hesitate. It reads like strategy, not romance. Culturally close enough to be trusted, distant enough not to become emotionally entangled, healthy, medically literate, and, if the story were true, someone who could disappear after the pregnancy, leaving Michael to control the narrative alone. In celebrity scandals, the assistant noted, the public often treats that kind of wording as confirmation, even when it's merely characterization. Michael had said publicly that Blanket was born via artificial insemination and surrogacy, but he never attached a name. So when Helena leaked into the conversation, the assistant remembered it feeling like a dam breaking. People declared they'd finally found the lost mother they had chased for years. And then came the detail that turned a mystery into something colder, a reported payment figure. The story claimed Michael paid Helena $20,000, covered all birth expenses, and arranged a team to care for her throughout the pregnancy. The assistant pointed out why that number hit so hard. In the economy of superstardom, it sounds simultaneously small and transactional. Exactly the kind of detail that makes readers feel they're seeing behind the curtain. Here, the public didn't just see a surrogate. They saw an exchange. A young, healthy Latin American woman, a dollar amount, and a clean exit after delivery. The assistant said that framing split people in two. Many felt for Blanket because it cast his origin story as a scar, his mother reduced to terms. Others felt for Helena because she existed only as adjectives and a number, no voice, no confirmed place in the story of the child she allegedly carried for 9 months. The drama intensified as coverage repeatedly insisted Helena was not Michael's lover. She was described as a fan, quiet, ordinary, present for a purpose, and then gone. In the public imagination, the assistant observed, that made it more tragic. If she were a lover, people could project emotion onto the connection. But when she was positioned as just a fan, the story hardened into pure calculation. Michael, the man celebrated for emotional performances, was recast as someone who put the sacred role of mother onto a negotiating table. As a journalist, I've seen how fast audiences flip between worship and indictment when a narrative offers them a contract instead of a love story. Rumors multiplied about how they supposedly met, a medical event where Michael was impressed by her knowledge, or a longtime fan who wrote letters repeatedly. But it all stayed at the level of hearsay. No photos, no verifiable documentation presented publicly, only a fog of claims. And that fog, the assistant admitted, is what kept the story alive. Helena became less a person than a silhouette, a ghost behind blanket, present in headlines yet untouchable in reality. What pained the public even more, according to the assistant, was the emotional mismatch between public noise and private life. Blanket grew up with only Michael Jackson's name on the birth certificate, while the space for mother stayed blank. Outside, the media shouted Helena. Inside Blanket's world, it was still an unsolved void. That void, the assistant said, behaved like a hidden wound. Always there, never addressed, never closing. Soon, people started weighing Pia Bhatti against Helena like competing scripts. On one side, a woman described as a nanny with proximity to the family. On the other, a Mexican-American nurse cast as a contractual entrant. Arrive, deliver, disappear. Both versions sounded plausible to different audiences. Both were dramatic, and Blanket ended up in the middle like a pawn, pulled across a chessboard of public opinion. Who was his mother, Pia, present in the household orbit, or Helena, the alleged ghost in a contract? Some fans argued the Helena story was logical. A perfectionist would choose someone with medical expertise. A fan not lover would align with a desire to separate emotion from parenthood. Others rejected it outright, calling the reported $20,000 figure implausibly low for someone of Michael's wealth and risk profile. One comment repeated in coverage: he would never choose such a cheap way for something as important as having a child, became fuel for endless dissection. The assistant's takeaway was blunt. Once the public has numbers, they stop asking whether the story is true and start arguing about whether the math feels right. The most haunting part was not whether Helena was real, but how her name was used. People talked about Helena as if she were a tool, a footnote to Michael's myth. No one knew what she thought when she allegedly agreed. No one knew if she ever wanted to meet Blanket. In the loudest headlines, Helena had no voice. She existed only through other people's claims. And that silence, the assistant told me, is what turned her into one of the most tragic characters in Blanket's story, whether or not she was ever there at all. Then the questions sharpened, not idle curiosity, but thorny, accusatory logic. If Helena truly was the birth mother, why did Michael never mention her? Why didn't she step forward? Was she asked to remain silent in exchange for money and permanent disappearance? Or was Helena simply a media invention designed to plug the very void Michael deliberately left behind? The painful truth is that, either way, Blanket lives with the whispers about Helena, about Pia, about a past he never got to choose. And as the public continues to argue, Blanket becomes the center of a tragedy that won't end. Not only Michael Jackson's child, but also the child of theories, rumors, and dramas he never asked for. The news hit like a storm. In 2009, while the world was still reeling from Michael Jackson's unexpected passing, Michael's former assistant told me the media lit a fresh shockwave with a claim that felt almost designed to reopen every wound. Lost diary pages, allegedly written by Michael, had suddenly surfaced. And inside, the assistant said, it wasn't just private reflection that startled people. It was the supposed key to the mystery itself. The name Helena appearing for the first time not through rumor, not through third parties, but in what was described as Michael's own trembling handwriting. The assistant described those pages as aged, hurried, sometimes scrawled, paper that looked as if it carried both obsession and calculation, the tension of a genius wrestling with a world he never fully trusted. Reports claim Michael reduced his choice of Helena to 3 words: safe, scientific, and absolutely secret. The assistant paused when repeating that phrase because it lands like a verdict. It suggests Blanket did not come from chance or romance. It suggests he came from design, an engineered outcome, a cold yet decisive plan that Michael believed he could control. This was the moment the drama reached its peak. The assistant insisted, because the phrase absolutely secret is an invitation to paranoia. What secret? Was Helena asked to vanish after fulfilling her role? Were there undisclosed terms, binding conditions, penalties for speaking? Or worse, was there a truth the Jackson family deliberately sealed away to protect reputation and legacy? The assistant told me they watched the public split into camps not over facts, but over what people needed the story to mean. Some outlets reported the diary was found in a safe alongside personal memorabilia. The assistant recalled passages attributed to the pages. Michael's loneliness, raising his children, his suspicion of the outside world, and his insist that everything had to be safe on his terms. In that framing, Helena was not presented as a partner, but as a solution, a means to achieve a desire. Another child without emotional entanglements, without the complications of a relationship that could be interrogated by cameras and courts of opinion. For many readers, the assistant said, that created a lump in the throat reversal. People who idolized Michael as an emotional force, an artist driven by love and pain, now confronted a different portrait, rational, detached, heartbreakingly pragmatic. And the question surfaced with it, did isolation and decades under a merciless spotlight shape him into someone who approached fatherhood like a controlled experiment? Then the Jackson family said nothing. No confirmation, no denial. The assistant told me that silence was more frightening than an admission because it left the public free to decide what to believe. One camp declared Helena the truth and treated the diary as final proof. Their logic was simple. Michael was meticulous. He wouldn't casually put something so critical on paper. If Helena was written there, Helena must be real, and Blanket must be the result of that choice. The other camp rejected it just as fiercely. They called it exploitation, another media stunt feeding on grief. The diary, they argued, could be fabricated, doctored, exaggerated. The assistant quoted the kind of reasoning that flooded fan spaces at the time. Michael might have mentioned Helena as an idea, not a reality. He could have considered possibilities. Writing a name doesn't automatically make it a person, a pregnancy, a child's origin story. The drama escalated when tabloids published what they claimed were direct excerpts. Helena understands. She does not ask. She does not question. She only helps me create life safely. If true, the assistant said, those lines are both gentle and chilling. Gentle in the language of understanding. Chilling because they reduce Helena to function. Not a mother, not a voice, not a presence. Only a helper to create life, permitted to exist only inside the boundaries of obedience. From there, the public imagination did what it always does. It built scenes. The assistant described how people pictured Helena signing binding documents, stepping out of Michael's orbit the moment the task was complete. Michael holding Blanket, joyful, yet aware that behind him trailed a secret that could never be spoken. It is an image too tragic to be ignored, too cinematic to die quickly, and that is precisely why it persisted. Among fans, empathy shifted heavily toward Blanket. The assistant told me they saw a new label appear again and again, not just Michael Jackson's youngest son, but a symbol of loss, a child born from a father's love, yet missing a mother's place in the story because of decisions that read like contracts. Some called him the child of shadows, not because he wasn't loved, but because his past was wrapped in secrecy, in alleged diary pages, and in rumor that never ran out of oxygen. What tightened the tension further was Helena's total disappearance. No confirmed face, no public record people could point to, no photograph, only hearsay and descriptions. To many, the assistant said, that absence made the absolute secret feel more credible. Helena was real precisely because she was invisible, bound to vanish so Blanket would have only one publicly acknowledged parent, Michael Jackson. But there was a competing interpretation. Some investigative journalists argued the silence was too perfect, too clean, almost unnatural. They asked whether Helena truly existed, or whether it was a name used as camouflage for something even more sensitive. In that reading, Helena becomes a veil, an invented character placed on paper to protect a different truth from ever being dragged into daylight. And so the spiral never ended. Was Helena real or a narrative? Creation? Was Blanket born from an agreement that was safe, scientific, and absolutely secret? Or was it all a product of tabloid imagination? The assistant's conclusion was not that the diary resolved the mystery, but that it made the name Helena more haunting because it offered the appearance of an answer while deepening the void beneath it. What remained after everything was suffocation. Those alleged diary pages didn't just reveal a truth, they opened a larger tragedy. A child growing up inside unresolved mysteries, a father so isolated he planned a birth like a project, and a woman, Helena, who if real would be remembered only through a few lines of text, never fully allowed to exist in her own role. So this wasn't merely a new chapter in Blanket's story, it was a knife twist, deeper damage for those who once admired Michael, loved Blanket, and were tormented by Helena's shadow. A secret that seemed revealed, yet the more it surfaced, the larger the emptiness became. And Blanket, the child born from love, from secrecy, or from a cold contract, remains at the center of a drama with no end. They often say time will tell all, but when I asked Michael Jackson's former assistant whether time ever softened the questions surrounding Blanket Jackson, now Bigi Jackson, they answered with a quiet certainty. Time didn't solve it, it only deepened it. Each year that passes, as Biggie matures, as the public gaze becomes less intrusive, as Michael Jackson's name recedes into the golden memories of a generation, the old question remains like a scar that never heals. Who truly gave birth to Blanket Jackson? The name Helena still echoes like a ghost, the assistant said, because it lives in the space between what was supposedly written and what was never fully shown. It's said that some diary pages were torn, pieces kept hidden, never released. Some in the press swear they saw a photocopy where Michael wrote Helena was the safest choice, but nothing can be verified. And that's the cruel mechanics of celebrity mystery. Words that may exist become relics that can't be authenticated, forever suspended in fog. Helena, the Mexican-American nurse, was she real, or was she a figure Michael created to fill a void? The assistant admitted that after more than 2 decades, even the people who were closest to the orbit can only speak in fragments. Pia Bhatti, the Norwegian woman pulled into the vortex of speculation, also faded out of the picture. Yet her disappearance only made her name more haunting. I put the obvious question to the assistant. If Pia truly had nothing to do with it, why never step forward and shut it down? They didn't rush to judgment. They acknowledged the split that has always powered this story. Some interpret silence as guilt. One word could have ended it, while others see silence as self-preservation, an attempt to protect family and sanity from a media storm that never sleeps. That division is why Pia remains an irreplaceable puzzle piece, whether the rumor was right or wrong, real or fictional. Then Biggie grew into adulthood and chose a private life unlike his siblings, Paris and Prince. The assistant described him as someone who learned early that visibility can be a threat. He rarely speaks publicly, and when he does, his eyes often hold a strange distance, an observational calm that reads like armor. A high school friend once said, "Biggie is very smart, but extremely quiet. It's like he's always carrying something no one can touch." And that very quietness, the assistant told me, kept feeding the public's curiosity. People don't treat Biggie's silence as personality. They treat it as evidence of a secret that never received a conclusion. Michael Jackson, the man who reached every peak the world could imagine, took his deepest secrets to the grave. The assistant said Michael protected Blanket by building layers. Stories, half-truths, half-fictions, and blanks only he could fill. But in that protection sat an unintended consequence. He left his son growing up with questions no one dared answer. And in the assistant's view, that is the bitter tragedy. Protection that also becomes inheritance, because silence passes down like property. The public, of course, never lets the story end. They compare the few descriptions that exist of Helena with Biggie's features. They scrutinize details between Omar Bhatti, Pia, and Blanket, constructing visual evidence that makes the rumors more complex. Every new generation of Michael fans rekindles the fire, driven by a familiar need. to understand everything about their idol, even what he tried to hide. That is why the story doesn't die. It loops, forever recycling suspicion into certainty and certainty back into suspicion. Today, Biggie is a young man who no longer needs explanations from strangers. The assistant suggested that to him, Helena may be only a foreign name, and Pia only a peripheral character attached to headlines he never asked for. What remains, if anything, is his father's love. A love so fierce Michael was willing to absorb judgment to bring him into the world. For Biggie, the truth may no longer matter. For the world, it has become an eternal mystery, a chapter that refuses to close in the turbulent novel called Michael Jackson. The final question, who truly was behind the birth of Blanket Jackson, may never be answered. And perhaps that is the most painful, extraordinary legacy Michael left. A secret that keeps people restless, yet also makes them admire the lengths he went to protect his child. Michael's legacy is not only timeless songs and world-shaking dance moves, it is also the missing pieces, the picture that never fully fits, always lacking a corner. And in that picture, Bigi Jackson remains the living witness, the embodiment of pain, love, and the price of fame. So the story ends not with a period, but with an ellipsis. Because in some lives, especially those lived under a global spotlight, the more we try to unravel a secret, the more we discover that silence is sometimes the final answer. In conclusion, when I asked Michael Jackson's former assistant how they now frame the story of Blanket, of Bigi Jackson, they didn't call it merely an unsolved mystery. They called it a mirror, reflecting the complicated geometry of love, fame, and the price of protecting a child from the blinding glare of the public eye. Michael Jackson is gone, taking the final, unfinished edges of his diary pages with him and leaving the world with the same single question that refuses to fade. What woman truly gave him that little angel? Helena, Pia, or another name that was never mentioned? Perhaps we will never know. But the assistant was clear about what is certain. Bigi Jackson remains a living testament to a father's boundless love, a love that rises above prejudices, rumors, and noise. And that, as any veteran observer of celebrity history understands, is the message that endures. Sometimes the truth isn't as important as the way we love and the way we protect what is ours. If this story also touched your heart, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe so we can continue to explore the untold secrets behind the legend of Michael Jackson. Because every share, every perspective can shed a little more light on the shadows.